So again, I want to thank everyone for, or I want to thank everyone for being here at our panel on Defund the Police. Many people are really puzzled with the sudden juxtaposition of the concept and movement of defund the police with climate and a climate emergency. The intersection of climate and defund the police have a very common denominator, and those are our BIOPC communities, our Black and Indigenous and communities of color. The negative impacts on both climate, as it does negatively impact those communities, and in terms of our police departments, in terms of the state-sanctioned violence that has disproportionately impacted those same communities, are very closely linked to both white supremacy and in terms of racist policies and practices that have been upheld, both in climate for the extraction of wealth and resources, and the systems that disproportionately, again, create a climate crisis that we're currently experiencing. And again, the result of the call to action of defund the police, and how, if you will, that call to action in this new movement for racial justice is truly an opportunity, if you will, to do multiple things. One, really assess and look at the institution of the police department from a historical lens. I'm so thankful for Ava DuVernay's film 13th for really illustrating the history of, if you will, the Black experience through the legislation and institutions that shape our current existence and experience as both Black people and persons of color here in the United States, including our Indigenous brothers and sisters and communities. To be able to bring that to the public really has given a language and permission, if you will, for many non-Black persons to begin to have an honest discourse on just these systems and institutions and their effects, if you will, on these much larger systems, such as climate itself. For where we are now with defund the police, the opportunity is to actually look at the possibility of taking 50% of a police budget, or of a municipality's police budget, or sheriff's budget, or as we're talking now nationally, the Pentagon budget, and reallocating those funds back to public health, public welfare programs, so that we can begin to serve our communities and not to decarcerate, but to demilitarize the police department, to work on policies that actually get to an anti-racist institution that begins to serve our community. Today, with our guests, we will explore this intersection of defund the police and climate with our guest here, James Birch, and with Christina Molina. We also have Nelsie Batista. I hope everybody's got their video on. Nelsie Batista, and also Nell Myhan, whose bios I had read. And I wanted to say I neglected to read James' bios, and I think he just shot me off an email of that, of such. And I wanted to say James Birch is president of the National Lawyers Guild here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the Bay Area chapter. and the policy director for the Anti-Police Terror Project. He's which is APTP, which many people know it as. It's an all-volunteer organization that seeks to end police violence in Black and Brown communities. He began his journey in 2007 at the Southern Center for Human Rights, where he investigated human rights conditions in Georgia and Alabama prisons, jails, and court systems. I'm really fortunate to have James here. And I should further say that he left SDHR in 2009 to pursue a study in civil rights law at Georgetown University Law Center. And after graduating, moved to the Bay Area, where he's worked with the Frisco 500 before joining APTP's Black Leadership Committee and assuming the role of policy director there. He ran APTP's Defund OPD working group for the last 5 years and has really laid some groundwork for many of us here nationally. With our other panels as well, I wanted to open this up, and I think I covered everyone's bio. Christina, I think I missed yours in terms of introducing you, Christina Molina. But I do want to open up with Nell Myhan. Nell, if as we introduce, or I guess as we speak, you guys will all come into center here. Again, I'm on a mobile, so it's a different experience. So Nell Myhan, for where you are and working with what you're doing right now, tell us a little bit of how you're looking at this and working on Defund the Police.
Well, I want to start by saying good morning to everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you, Amos, for the work that you're doing around climate justice and racial justice, because climate justice is impossible without racial justice and vice versa. Those two things are linked, and it's impossible to have one without the other. I also want to acknowledge the passing of C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, because they knew that Black Lives Matter and devoted their lives to creating a society that had respect for Black people. And so I just want to acknowledge that our movements today are built on the shoulders of our ancestors. And I want to also say that it's really poignant in light of the worldwide Black Lives Matter protests that we're having this summit today. I'm here representing the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and also Global Women's Strike Women of Color. The Global Women's Strike Women of Color is an international campaign calling for a care and come now for people and the environment, ending poverty, racism, and war. And we're coordinated by Black Women for Wages for Housework. And recently, women of color in the Global Women's Strike took part in actions for Black Lives Matter outside an arms factory in Midlands in the UK. And that arms factory makes riot gear, tear gas, rubber bullets that are being used by US police today. And so when they were outside this, and they also held a protest outside the International Trade and Industry Office, which is the government department in the UK that gives licenses for arms sales. And so they were standing there to raise objection to the government profiting from the export of arms and riot gear used to repress peaceful BLM and other demonstrations. And the UK licensed sales to murderous regimes, for example, in Haiti, Hong Kong, Israel, the US and Saudi Arabia. And they're calling to defund corporate and government warmongers, the police, the military, and instead pay mothers and other carers for a care income for the work of sustaining people, our communities, and the planet. So, you know, I'm sure people on the call know that the Defund the Police fight is motivated by the murders of Oscar Grant, Alan Bluford, Yvette Henderson, Raheem Brown, Demorio Hogg, you know, locally, Eric Garner, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland. You know, the list is long. And so we are acting in memory of their lives and in defense of our own. And I want to say that one thing that some studies have shown is that actually Native Americans are killed at higher rates by the police than any other racial group. And so, you know, it's really important that we really get who's being targeted. There is some progress that's been made, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from James Birch about that in greater detail, but you know, OUSD school board did unanimously vote to dismantle the school police here, which is huge. And across the country, the question of defunding the police has been taken up much more seriously than I've ever seen it taken up. And so, you know, we have the movement to thank for that. And APTP here in Oakland has been in the lead of that. And so I look forward to hearing from James about that. So in terms of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, the new Poor People's Campaign is picking up the work of the 1968 campaign that was called by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King before he was assassinated. And he articulated a clear formula for how the poor can claim power that resides within our communities. And he said, power for poor people will really mean having the ability, the togetherness, the assertiveness, and the aggressiveness to make the power structure of this nation say yes when they may be desirous to say no. And so that's what the new Poor People's Campaign is doing. It's bringing together people, poor people across geography, ethnicity, gender identity, issue, as many kinds of diversity as you can mention are represented in the Poor People's Campaign. And in 1968, the Poor People's Campaign called by Martin Luther King actually did establish Resurrection City on the National Mall, and they were there for 5 weeks, about 3,000 people. They had their own zip code, and they were challenging the 3 pillars of evil that Dr. King had identified: systemic racism, poverty, and militarism. And so the new Poor People's Campaign, which was launched in 2017, December 2017, by Reverend Dr. William Barber and Reverend Dr. Liz Thiel Harris, has taken those 3 pillars, because obviously we're still needing to challenge those 3 pillars, and added ecological devastation and the distorted moral narrative. And by distorted moral narrative, we are talking about the myth that there's not enough, that we can't afford clean energy, that not everybody can be housed. There are too many people for everybody to expect to be fed. Not everybody can expect to be educated or have health care. And we know that that's a myth. We know there's plenty. And that the idea of blaming poor people for our poverty has to end. And so the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is committed to amplifying the voices of poor people. We want to change the narrative by changing the narrator.
Good.
So we have a lot of partners in this work, including a lot of environmental organizations, 350.org, Climate Reality Project, Earth Day Network, Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, Food and Water Watch, Global Women's Strike. A lot of the sororities and fraternities are on board with us. The Rabbinical Assembly, Sunrise Movement, a lot of the unions, Unite Here, United Auto Workers. We have lots of partners because, as I said, the vision is pretty expansive. And so there are a lot of people who identify with the principles of the Poor People's Campaign and the demands. And so some of our principles are that we're rooted in a moral analysis based on our deepest religious and constitutional values that demand justice for all. We're committed to lifting up and deepening the leadership of those most impacted by systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, and ecological devastation, and to building unity across lines of division. We believe equal protection under the law is non-negotiable. We're nonpartisan, but quite political, because part of the distorted moral narrative is that poor people are poor because of some personal failing or some mistake that we made, some lapse in judgment. But what we know is that there are policies in place that have created the poverty that we experience and that hold us in poverty. And as Dr. Barber likes to say, it took Black people 400 years to get from 0 to $7.75 an hour. And we are not gonna wait another 400 years to get to 15. So we really are focused on changing the policies that are in place, and we have some tools that we are using to do that. But the next thing I wanna do is share the demands video. And so is it possible for me to do that, Amos?
Yes, it is. There you go.
So all notice. The pain and the discontent is real, and the demands of our movement are moral.
We know what we want to focus on. Our agenda is clear.
We demand an immediate implementation of federal and state living wage laws. We demand the right for all workers to form and join unions. We demand equal pay for equal work. We demand a guaranteed annual income. We demand fully funded anti-poverty programs that protects the welfare of us all.
We demand the expansion of Medicaid in every state. We want single-payer universal health care, not for some, but for everybody.
An immediate restoration of the Voting Rights Act. We demand an end to racist gerrymandering.
We want early registration of 17 and 18-year-olds. We want registration to vote at age 18. If we can be drafted for war at 18, we ought to be able to vote automatically at 18. Early voting in every state, same-day registration, and the enactment of Election Day as a holiday.
We demand a reversal of state laws that prevent municipalities from raising minimum wage.
We demand an end to mass incarceration and the continuing inequalities of Black, brown, and poor white people with the criminal justice system.
We demand the right to vote for the formerly incarcerated. A clear and just immigration system. This includes providing a timely citizenship process that guarantees the right to vote. The First Nation, Native American, and Alaskan Native people retain their tribal recognition as a nation, not a race.
We demand decent housing. We demand relief from crushing household, student, and consumer debt.
We demand
equity in education. We demand an end to the resegregation of schools. We demand free tuition at public colleges and universities and an end to profiteering on student debt. Equitable funding for historically Black colleges and universities.
We demand the repeal of the 2017 federal tax law. And we demand that the wealthy and corporations pay their fair share.
We demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. We demand a stop to privatization of military budget and any increase in military spending. We demand a ban on assault rifles and a ban on the easy access of firearms. We demand an end to federal programs that send military equipment into local and state communities. We demand that the call to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexico border be ceased.
We demand a ban on fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, coal ash ponds, and offshore drilling. We demand a ban on all new pipelines, refineries, and coal, oil, and gas export terminals.
We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
Somebody's hurting my brother, somebody's hurting our sisters, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
We believe that we can win. We believe that we can win. We believe that everybody has a right to live, to live, to live, to live, to live.
Okay, so that gives
Thank you, Nell.
You're welcome. So that gives you some sense of our, the kind of the span of our demands. And so as you heard in the video, we are calling for a reduction in military budget, police budgets, and to have that money be reallocated to be used for human needs and care of the environment. We know that inaction on climate change could cost $3.3 trillion per year for the US economy. So there's a way that doing the right thing in terms of taking care of the environment costs less than not doing so. That's the equivalent of 5 great recessions every year. And we know that a $200 billion per year investment in clean energy transition would have begun to address climate change and create 2.7 million new jobs. Defunding the police would rein in the violence being perpetrated against disproportionately Black and Brown communities. And it would signal a shift in priorities from a death-affirming culture, which is what we're in now, to a life-affirming culture, which we desperately need. And so I want to just highlight one of the places where it has been really clear to me that the intersection between climate and defunding the police can be seen, which is probably most people on this call remember Standing Rock, which in 2016, there were thousands of people who turned up in Standing Rock in support of stopping the DAPL pipeline. And the police and the sheriffs there brought out the dogs. It was the dead of winter. They attacked people with water cannons, knowing that, that they would be freezing wet. And in fact, arrested Red Fawn Fallis, and she is still in jail. She's in prison right here in Dublin, California, for defending water and the environment. So it's really clear that by defunding the police, it would reduce the vulnerability of people who are protesting to defend democracy, defend their lives, defend the environment, and that money could be better put to supporting life. So the last thing I want to just say about the Poor People's Campaign is that on June 20, 2020, we held a moral mass assembly and march on Washington, a digital justice event. We had planned to be in DC, but obviously that wasn't possible. So the silver lining in the COVID cloud is that it was broadcast 3 times at 7 in the morning Pacific time, 3 in the afternoon Pacific time on both Saturday and Sunday. And between those 3 broadcasts, there were over 2.5 million people who watched. And one of the things that happened during that event was that we released the Jubilee policy platform. And I can put the link in the chat. And that platform is divided into 5 sections: establish justice and end systemic racism, promote the general welfare, ensure domestic tranquility, secure the blessings of liberty, and provide for the common defense, reprioritizing our resources. And it's grounded in 5 principles. We need a moral revolution of values to repair the breach in our society. Everybody in, nobody out. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. We prioritize the leadership of the poor, low income, and most impacted. And debts that cannot be paid must be relieved. We demand freedom from servicing debts we cannot pay. And in that platform, we declare climate change a national emergency, and call for redefining critical infrastructure as infrastructure necessary for a 100% renewable and climate resilient economy. Prohibit the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure, expand and strengthen the EPA, allocate federal resources to climate research and climate crisis mitigation. And also we call to demilitarize the communities, including ending police violence, mass incarceration, and demilitarizing the US and Mexico border. And we're pressing public and elected officials to adopt this platform. And so we encourage you to join us in doing that, because if they were to adopt this platform, we're calling for a $350 billion cut, for instance, in the US military budget. And if that were to happen, along with fair taxes, corporations paying their fair share of taxes, millionaires and billionaires paying their fair share of taxes, that we could provide for the needs of the 140 million people pre-COVID who are living in poverty, in or near poverty, and the millions more who are being pushed into poverty in light of the massive unemployment that we are experiencing in the pandemic. And so we invite you to join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate that. I want to make sure my audio isn't echoing here. No, good. Nell, I really appreciate that. If there are any questions or whatnot, please drop those in the chat. We're going to move right along to our next person to speak, which will be Nelsie Batista. Or let me ask the panelists, I do want to leave this open. If any of the panelists want to address what Nella said or add on to what she did, please do.
Yeah, I am going to be honoring Nell's, her work, especially with the Poor People's Campaign, but I do want to open the panel discussion up to having other members speak first. I would like to give the opportunity for, especially because I'm here not just as myself and the organizations that I'm here with, but also in support of fighting for education in Oakland and education here in Alameda County. And so I do want to hear from other panelists before, and then of course including Christina Molina. And then I don't mind going last. If that's okay.
Okay, thank you. That's fine.
Okay.
James?
Sure. Thanks so much, Nell, for all you spoke on and all the work that you do and have done. And then a deep thank you for lifting up the names of people killed by police in Oakland and in the East Bay. I heard you say Alan Bluford. I heard you say DeMaurier Hogg. and those are not names that I hear shouted out very often. And so I like very, very much appreciate that. My name is James Birch. I'm the policy director for the Anti-Police Terror Project, and I've been running the Defund OPD campaign for just under 5 years now. And so while I wear a lot of other hats and APTP does a lot of things, I think for the purposes of this conversation, I will keep it to the work of Defund OPD unless other people have any other questions. And so I want to start by just lifting up that defund, just the phrase defunding the police is an evolving phrase that we're watching shift before our very eyes. I want to bring people back to when we introduced the campaign Defund OPD 4.5 years ago, and it was seen as ludicrous. And the concept of defunding the police department by 50% was a political non-starter, so much so that some of our allies on the left were reluctant to campaign alongside us because it was seen as a politically untenable, like a politically just unrealistic campaign to be pushing. And obviously over time things, well, let me zoom out. I want to explain why we came up with the Defund OPD campaign, because I think it's really important, especially in the context of folks who have been steeped and centered in environmental justice work. I know that a lot of us grow up with very deep and enduring beliefs on our system of policing that have caused a lot of strife and division in today's society, right? Whereas there are a large sector of our society who grow up seeing the police as a body of integrity and honor, and being a policeman might be something that you dress up for as Halloween. It's a proud profession, something kids want to grow up to be. In Black and Indigenous and Brown and other marginalized communities, not so. I remember when I was very young being told by my mother not to let the police into my house unless they had a warrant, before even knowing what a warrant was. And so the question to us at the Anti-Police Terror Project became, how do we bridge this divide, right? When I'm saying the police make me and my people unsafe, and white people or people who don't share that experience within my race just don't have a framework for understanding that. How can I communicate across that gap? Because it's such a fundamental gap, as I mentioned, it's difficult to just state my truth and have someone else accept it, right? So we thought of the framework of defunding the police using divest invest, which is a framework that's been used by activists for generations. In our capitalist society, we thought that would be a framework that people would more easily understand. So I'll give an example. So again, when I say that the police make me unsafe, for someone for whom the police are the people who keep us safe, that doesn't make sense. If I say that we give the police 50% of Oakland's general fund, $330 million a year, and that number is increased by 300% over the last 20 years, and still public safety hasn't been affected, we can start having a conversation about what we're really investing in with that $330 million, right? And so, and further, there are a lot of community groups. When Defund first started, the formation was Defund OPD, Invest in Community, and we worked with a group called Refund Oakland, a group of organizations who were looking for a small slice of the pie to serve the communities that they had always served. Maybe there was a group that fed the unhoused and needed $800,000 to continue their contract. Like maybe, I don't know if y'all know Centro Legal de la Raza. It's a group that helps folks who are having trouble with ICE and immigration. They might need $600,000 or $800,000 to continue their work. And so that money has to come from somewhere, right? And what we're pointing out at Defund OPD is that all of that money is found in the police budget, right? The rest of the city budget is crammed into a small corner of this pie just to feed the beast that is police, right? So, for example, in 2020, the police, with their $330 million budget, got more money than these following agencies combined. The Office of Race and Equity, economic and workforce development, parks, recreation and youth development, libraries, housing and community development, transportation, and human services, right? If you add up all of those budgets, you still don't get as much money as we give the police every year, right? And so the question really becomes, what are we getting for our money, right? And then if you start digging into the police budget and what they do with that $330 million, the questions become even more glaring, right? We know that 32% of all OPD calls are traffic, vehicle issues, medical issues, mental health issues, welfare checks, and animal control issues, right? All of that does not need to be done by police. We also know that another 14% of the police budget is municipal code violations, people calling the police on the house list, people having trouble with substance abuse. And so when we start really looking at what we're paying the police to do, it's a whole lot of nothing. It's a whole lot of things that we should be giving the money to people who are trained professionals who've been working their whole lives and investing their whole lives to train in a specific position, whether it be providing mental health services, engaging in social work. In the context of this current conversation, investing in the environment, whether it be environmental racism locally or the larger concerns we face as the city of Oakland with Phil Tagami mucking up our ports, lead in the soil, and so many other problems. If we want to invest in solutions for those problems, it's going to take tens of millions of dollars. And if we look at the economic reality of Oakland right now, not only do we not have that money, the police are taking an ever increasing chunk, right? Oakland has unfunded liabilities that mean that it might be facing a bankruptcy problem down the line, right? So there's an urgent need in the city of Oakland, like cities across the country, to defund the police, not just ideologically, not just idealistically, but also practically and rationally. If we're going to start turning the situation around when it comes to the increasing disaster capitalism that we find ourselves in year after year. And so in the interest of facilitating further conversation, I'll stop there, but happy to talk more about the intricacies. Sorry, you're on mute, Amos.
Yeah, now that I'm back on a computer here. Any questions, please feel free to ask away. I want to make this free flow for people, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question in between if need so. Anyone? Chat's always good too. And also to remind the panelists, as you're speaking, you might see a chat pop up. Feel free to give it an eye, and if it is addressing something that you're saying right now, feel free to break from what you're saying to address that question if you want to. It's just a way to keep the flow going and to be able to address participants as they're participating within the discussion as well. But thank you, James. Christina Molina.
Hello.
I had the unfortunate dishonor of not having your bio before me when
That's okay.
My computer crashed this morning as I was up at 6:30, but it decided to reset on me and she hasn't started back up. I'm actually on a Windows version here. But Christina Molina, everyone, is a alumni of the Bay Area Wilderness Training, where she took low-income sexually assaulted children of color in healing retreats to Yosemite, Mount Shasta, and Black Oak. She's a member of the Sierra Club California Stop Clear Cutting campaign, an activist, a mother of 4 OUSD students, and you can see that wonderful wall behind her of some of their artwork. Yeah. You see them shooting behind her there in the kitchen, just like mine are zinging past here in the living room. Welcome to our world. But she is, I'm excited to have you here, Christina. Just also to let everyone know, she is currently running for the Oakland School Board in District 7. So putting her activism to policy making or seeking to do so. So Christina.
Yes, thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Cristina Molina, Chicana, cisgender, pronouns she, her, hers, ella. I am a proud mother of 4 boys in the Oakland Unified School District. 2 are special learners. One has an IEP, the other one a 5-4 plan, and they're moving forward. It's not an easy process to be a mom of special children and special learners, because I feel that our education system is not built for them, right? It's a one hat fits all, and that's a mistake that we keep on doing and making, because my children are capable of learning, but not in this way that they're being instructed to. So the reason I decided to run is because I saw the pipeline from my son Ketsa, who is impulsive, has ADHD. I saw the pipeline from school to prison, and it was this constant molding of him into being something that he's not, to sit crisscross applesauce every morning, to listen to a 30-minute lecture from the teacher and not to move, to stay still. That's not Ketsa. He has ADHD. He's hyperactive. He needs to learn in a different way, with somatics, with movement. He's capable of learning. I consider him to be one of my smartest children, but right now he's hating school. He became incredibly violent, and it's expected. I mean, what do you expect of a child that every day he's asked to put a size 4 when he's really a size 7 shoe? And you do have the aides that tell that child, you can take your shoe off and, rest a little bit, that size 7 foot. But now you have to put it back again into that size 4 shoe. So obviously violence is going to erupt. The child is going to get overwhelmed, tired, irritated, because it's being taught in a way that is not cognitively appropriate for him. So I'm in it for the children in our flatlands. And let me tell you what we're facing. And I'm just telling you from my own personal experience. For the past 12 months, we have 4 drive-by shootings. We have a man assault his wife in front of his children, my children, and the neighborhood's children. We have illegal dumping almost every single day. So me going around the block with a bike in the flatlands with my children is not possible, right? Because there are mattresses, there are furniture, there's bags of trash, there's abandoned cars. And the air quality, it's sometimes you can smell it. We have a big company here in our neighborhood that melts steel, and it just produces a very horrible air. Even you can taste it. Sometimes I just have to close my windows because it's impossible to breathe the air outside of my home. So what do I stand for? I do stand for the removal of the Oakland Police Department from public education. Why? Since 1992, I was actually holding my first protest sign against the police department. I was at UC Berkeley, and we were demanding the removal of the UC Berkeley Police Department because it was targeting Latinos and African-American students at UC Berkeley. So that was when we began our struggle. We knew that the police, for us, for our community, was an act of terror. They were actually targeting us, and the punishments or the arrests that we were receiving compared to our white students and colleagues were taken to the extreme, to the point that it was violent. It was a violent encounter all the time. So one of the things that I hope that I can make as your next Oakland Unified School District Director is really to use the $2.5 million and really incorporate it on a first responders team. So what is a first responders team? Basically, when a child is getting an F or a D on their first quiz, when a child is being disrupted in the class or harming other students, we send this team of community members that specialize and understand the culture and the grievances of our community to find out what's hindering the success of this child. So, and I'm gonna tell you one little story. I was working at Bay Area Women Against Rape. I've been in the anti-rape movement for almost more than a decade. And I received a student from an East Oakland high school. Her report card was straight Fs. She was not succeeding. She was very distracted in school. And one day when she walked into my office, I started talking to her. And, she disclosed that she was being sexually exploited. So imagine on Sunday being taken around by your pimp, being forced to sleep with multiple men, and then the next day showing up for algebra class. She was not attentive. She was suffering. She was going into school with post-traumatic stress disorder. So we worked with her I worked with her for several weeks. The pimp was arrested. And one day, I would never forget it. She walked in, to my office. She bought a little piece of paper that was folded, and she handed it over to me. And, I was, overwhelmed. It was her report card. She got straight A's. So for me to call the police on any of these children who are being disrupted in class, who are attacking other children, you need to find out what is hindering their success. Why is that child acting up? And for me to see that a teacher waited months and just gave, without any support to that child, and just gave a final grade of F or a D. Why did we wait it so long? Where was the intervention team when that child got an F or a D on the first quiz? Where was the help? Where was the support when you saw that student was not even paying attention or was falling asleep in the class? Where was that support? So for me, using the funds of the OPD will be towards that. But one of the things that I also noticed, when I was taking these specific children that were being sexually exploited, that were being, trafficked, because unless, I don't know if you're aware, but in 2017, Oakland was the #1 city where children were being exploited. These were not children that were being trafficked from other countries. These were our own children, the majority from East Oakland, and the majority being young African-American girls. Right now we're at the top 3 in the nation. So when I was taking these children to heal, because I needed to remove them from East Oakland. With all the violence that they were experiencing, we needed to remove these children from East Oakland and take them to a safe haven. So the safe haven for them was Yosemite, was Mount Shasta, was Black Oak. And when you took the children there, you see that the healing began because the senses all connected, right? They were smelling of fresh air that was not smelled in East Oakland. They were sensing different textures. They were seeing trees. I mean, even just watching James' background is healing for me, because he's surrounded by trees. So I was taking East Oakland children similar to the background of James. So they were healing. Sorry, it's gonna get a little loud. I'm a mother of 4 boys, and my house is small.
Good. Go ahead.
I don't have a private office. Kids, I'm doing an interview. If you guys can keep it as quiet as possible, I greatly appreciate it. So it was seeing, it was breathing, it was feeling, but it was also connecting. And really, you don't need to do anything in nature. You don't need to have a workshop. You need to have a journal. All you have to do is take the children from East Oakland, put them in nature, and just let them feel it, let them connect, let them heal. And, for the past 7 years, I was doing that. I was taking children that were suicidal, that had post-traumatic stress disorder, and immersing them in this process so that they can find their healing process, and they are reactive to it. They were happy in nature. I mean, you had to see it. And keep it simple. If you were about to take children, keep it very, very simple. I was doing, at the beginning, I was doing complicated things. I was doing like, oh, let's go, let's go and do some snow walking with snowshoeing, right? Children from the East Oakland didn't want to go snowshoeing. They wanted to build, a snowman. They wanted to build angels in the snow. They wanted to run. They wanted to have a bullfight. Keep it simple. Most of the children were just there for the first time. They had never touched snow. So you can see how excited I was just to see that and how happy they were. And some of them had never been to a beach or a lake or a river. So all that was very exciting for them. So for me, to use those $2.5 million that was used to fund OPD is really to begin to fund a healing process for our children, right? Instead of calling the police, let's call this first responders team and let's see how we can help heal these children. But when we begin to talk about healing our children, we also have to begin to incorporate very culturally sensitive forms of healing. You know, most of our, unfortunately, our psychological intervention is based on very European ways, you know, of healing the community. But, you know, the incredible thing is that we're getting a lot of African immigrants. The majority of immigrant students that are coming into Oakland Unified School District are from Africa. So let's begin to incorporate their healing process. So then let's not us dictate how we should heal the children, but what kind of culturally sensitive ways can we begin to heal? I understood that nature heals, that children don't really want to sit in a counseling session and talk over and over about how they felt when they got assaulted or by their uncle or when they were sexually exploited. Children want a space where they can be happy and being connected with what makes them happy. And I discovered that nature was one of them. So, but when we talk about nature, we also have to incorporate the food that our children are eating. You know, my son was being, you know, for breakfast was being given frosted flakes. You know, why are we doing that to them? At the house, I you know, feed them oatmeal and Cheerios. You know, I try to be as organic as possible. And I hear a lot of Latina mothers and a lot of African American mothers and white mothers and Asian mothers complaining about the food in our schools because it's not holistic. Here we're trying to teach them in our house to eat healthy fruits and vegetables. And then they go to the school and they're being served highly processed food, highly sugary food. And then when they do serve, you know, the vegetable, they serve like a raw broccoli. You know, when if you were to just cook that broccoli, put a little bit of, you know, some spices, children will love it. I know my children love, you know, to eat broccoli, but it has to be, you know, cooked and given a little bit of flavor. And that's their conclusion to say, well, you see, the students didn't eat the broccoli. Well, yeah, the way it was served, it was not holistic and it was not appropriate. So yeah, I agree with James. No one likes plain steamed broccoli unless it's dipped in something. So let's talk about the food and where the food is coming from. We have, you know, we're farmers. You know, I come from a family of pickers, you know, who joined Cesar Chavez in the movement. And, you know, and I'm pro organic food and I'm pro students growing that food in their school because there has to come an appreciation of what we eat. I mean, we are the country that wastes the most food, vegetables and fruits.
Whoa, there's a lot of people.
I know there's a lot of people and they're listening right now and they're listening to me. So, yeah, so it's really about, you know, really, why are we purchasing, you know, out-of-state vegetables pre-packaged? Just bring the wholesome fruit straight cut from the farms so that children can actually, you know, taste what a carrot tastes like. A carrot is so sweet once you freshly pick it up from the fields, but it gets a little bit bitter as time goes on, so that our children can really buy bread and taste the vibrant taste of our food. So, so really working on the holistic food. But the main thing is, if we're going to talk about climate change, let's talk about climate change in our schools. Our children are breathing, you know, highly contaminated airs. There's some schools, unfortunately, that are being opened right off of Freeway 880 with hardly any trees to counteract the smog that the teachers and the students are going to be breathing. So it's about planting trees, having plants inside the house, to inside the classroom, so that children are breathing fresh air. And you know, filling in their lungs, you know, with just fresh, clean air. So, and I do agree with working collectively to hold those individuals and those corporations that are contaminating our air. They cannot keep on getting away with it. You know, there has to be a tax. There has to be trees planted around. There has to be a way that, you know, the exhaust from their companies or corporations is like they need to purify the air before they send it out and us breathing that air. So, so like I say, you know, I really hope that, you know, that we can use these funds to help heal children, because for me, the most saddest thing that I have ever seen was when I went to visit one of those children that was being sexually exploited. I don't know why she was in jail to begin with. I mean, you know, she obviously was being exploited, but there was a concept of a child prostitute, which we already know that that concept doesn't exist. The child was being prostituted. Big difference. She was not a criminal. She was a victim. But anyways, I had to go see her to see how she was doing. And And the saddest thing was just to see all those children in prison. I mean, what have we done? You know, we are so far from the essence of this land. I can never imagine the Ohlone community sending a child to prison, you know, but we have, and it has become a business. So it's just the hardest thing. It just broke my heart to see how far that we have gotten. So you know that I'm against any type of policing of our children. If a child is disrupted, getting F or a D, that's an indicative that something is wrong with him. And we need to use these funds, you know, to make sure that we get to the bottom of what's hindering the success on our children. So, well, that's it for me. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Amos, of Christina?
Go right ahead.
Okay. Christina, this is for you, but after you answer, I'm open to anyone else who has an affirmative answer. When you were talking about the community first response as opposed to calling the police, this may seem like a trivial semantic question, but it's not, because it becomes a political issue. If we're talking about defunding the police and creating new structures. Transforming the police doesn't work, okay? We've proven that very well. But if, I'm wondering, is it possible to redefine the police so that there are peace officer responders who are social workers, the people you talked about as the first responders, that would be within the police umbrella, but they would be given kind of first authority over the first response and maybe some power to direct if there's a police follow-up response. Like, you know, let's say you're rescuing a child, that the social workers, et cetera, and teachers, whoever is involved, would be giving direction to who are the bad guys, who are the good guys, and how to help the child by concentrating on the abuser and not coming into the home in a way that disrupts the child's psyche any more than it already is. And the reason this is important, I think, is because a lot of America can understand everything you're saying, but I fear that a lot of the middle-class white folks I know just panic at the idea of defunding the police. And they would like to talk about, they're comfortable talking about reforming the police, but we know that doesn't work. So what I'm thinking is, has anyone talked, have you thought about, and have others thought about, talked about, taking the idea you have, but calling it transforming the police structure so that there is a peace officer response that kind of takes the lead? You know, in other words, if they're being called to a family issue or a kids issue or a sex issue or even a homelessness, mental health issue, the peace officers are called who are not trained in violent response and arrest. They're trained in de-escalation and counseling and problem solving and referrals. And they call the shots when the regular police who are there for enforcement come in. And maybe they don't even give up control, so that the police only are calling the shots when they're being called to, you know, a shooting or a live crime and violence in session. So Christina, and then James looks like he's ready to respond, and then I have to run to another meeting. So Christina.
Thank you.
James, do you want to respond?
I welcome you to go first if you'd like, Christina.
Okay. So for me, you know, yeah, we cannot transform, you know, the police, but we can transform our children. You know, I do believe so. I mean, there's evidence. There's evidence that, you know, at this early age, you know, children can be healed. You know, you can turn the bully into you know, into an anti-bully individual. So it all happens here. I believe that there's no presence of police should ever be with children, ever. Children are, you know, most of the children are born in this world, not saying when I grow up I'm going to be a rapist, when I grow up you know, I'm going to be a racist, when I grow up I'm going to be a sexist. They don't, or homophobic. They don't. It's something that is ingrained and taught, and usually by adults. So no police we would need to really just call this responders team that are specialized individuals. So we're talking about social workers, community organizations, that have already been working, with the community's issues. Because one of the things that I want everybody to know is that, activists don't need a wake-up call. All of us that have been working in the trenches in the community don't need to wake up to what the nation is waking up. We knew about the housing crisis before anyone knew. We knew
I
about
agree
the
with you about everything
epidemic.
you're saying, but how do you feel about changing the language so that this force does not stand apart from, but maybe is over the police?
No, and it needs to stand apart. It needs to
that's
stand
what I
apart.
want to know.
We're dealing with children. Because the ultimate thing about the police is just to punish the child and send them to prison, right? And we need to completely stop the pipeline from school to prison. Because children, if they get an F or a D or they're acting up in school, is that they need help. They need intervention, not punishment. So
Agreed.
yeah, we cannot have them as an umbrella. Thank you.
Okay, James, do you feel the same?
Yes, I do. And I just want to, there's a couple things I want to mention here. One, appealing to the sensitivities of white moderates has never led us to a solution that is workable, right? So I just want to lift that up. It's their fault that they're behind and not our fault that they can't see where we're coming from. And then two, there's this great myth that the police are violence interrupters. I think the media is largely responsible for this, but I've heard a bunch of manifestations of your concern, Cliff. It's like, what about that time when someone's really dangerous, though, and we really need the cops? And it's like, that just often, if not almost always, does not happen. That's not a scenario that exists, right? As was just being said by Christina, at most what we're going to need is someone who's trained in de-escalation to come and speak to these folks and recognize their humanity. Right? And so the danger about when those entities are connected to the cops is that there's always inevitably, the state always institutes criteria when the cops take over. That's how it works, right? If it is this level of dangerousness, then the cops are going to take over. So it might be someone says something that it can constitute a threat to another person or a threat to themselves, or there's even legal standards for folks who are psychologists or handle in that field where they have to respond. And so when we legislate towards that end, or we create systems towards that end, what inevitably happens is the police become the responder. I'll give you an example from yesterday. My partner got a call. Someone mistook my partner's phone number for a mental health crisis line because we do a lot of work in this area. And so they called my partner and they said, I'm in mental health crisis. I'm in San Francisco at this address. I need help. What can you do? And so we had a lot of conversations. We got a cop watcher there because we realized the only solution we had was to call San Francisco's mental health hot team, like their emergency response team. And so we called them and we told them that this person was not a danger, did not need police. They needed mental health services. And the hot team said, we can't come because that doesn't satisfy our criteria. And then they called the cops and the cops showed up. Right. And so we went from a situation where we trained professionals who are doing our best to, we couldn't even get a situation where this person who was no threat to anyone didn't have to interact with cops to get mental health services. And they didn't even get mental health services. The cops just came and sat and watched and tried to make sure that they weren't a danger. And so I give you this anecdote because it represents a lot of systems I've seen that work towards this end. I think a lot of people, what people don't realize is the things we're talking about needing right now, the last iteration of these, we're tied into the state. We're tied into state practices. We have mental health emergency teams. We have teams that serve the unhoused communities, but they're always linked with the cops in a way that risks interaction with law enforcement that can lead to death, like the death of Stephen Taylor in Walmart in San Leandro, like the death of Joseph Pollock at the hand of OPD, when he was unhoused, just sleeping. He woke up and was shot and killed, and so many others. And so I really want us to resist investing in a system that is tied into the state. I really want us to encourage investing in community-based organizations that are unattached to the state and who do this work rooted in community and some of the ancestral traditions that people have been lifting up on this call.
Good, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Thank you.
Good, I had to hook up my headset here. And thank you. I want to move right along, and thank you, Cliff, for the question, to Nelsie Bautista without missing a hitch here. Nelsie, how are you seeing things, and how are you working on this issue of defund the police?
Yes, oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say first and foremost, thank you to CEMTF for having me and for having even Christina, who I'm also working very closely with around looking currently for supplemental pay for parents and for more monies for para-educators as we are about to begin to homeschool our children again for the fall semester and for the rest of the year. I too am a mother of I have a 7.5-year-old. And we were left in this last lockdown during March, in the month of March. We as parents were left to completely homeschool our children on our own. We had no curriculum, no training. I did not study education. Even though I have a master's in international studies, I had to do my best with Bill Nye the Science Guy and YouTube and everything that I could to make sure that my daughter was equipped and able to, be able to continue on to her education for the years to come. And it looks like we are literally about to become teachers once again. And so we are calling on full supplemental income for parents who will be having to homeschool amidst a lot of other asks. And I am going to be putting both petitions that we wrote together, I'm going to be putting it in the chat box once I'm done speaking. I don't want to take up too much time because I do want to hear from other people as well. But I do want to say thank you so much to CEMTF. Thank you to even Karina opening up with a prayer. And thank you so much, Nell, James, Christina, Amos, and Cliff for speaking so far. It's just been so phenomenal to hear all of you and all of your perspectives. As mentioned earlier, I'm an East Bay organizer, a consultant that works on local, state, and national campaigns. I also have been reaching out to work on global campaigns as well. I am a member of Our Revolution, Wellstone, Sierra Club, Northern Alameda County, and also the United Nations East Bay, United Nations Association East Bay, excuse me. And I want to highlight something that Nell was speaking about when she was introducing the Poor People's Campaign. I also attended the Poor People's Campaign, the Call to Action webinar, and it was absolutely phenomenal in highlighting several stats that I didn't even know had existed, including the fact that the nation is facing a 40% poverty rate, right? We're not hearing about that in the news. We are not being told any of this, and what exactly is going on when it comes to poverty and what exactly is going on in our personal lives. And so I appreciate Nell for raising the global perspective. Excuse me, sorry, we have really bad allergies and everything. I wanted to raise the global perspective and why this is really crucial. And it's crucial because, because when we talk about defunding police, defunding the Pentagon, deprivatization of the military, I think it's really crucial to understand, when I was, not just for me, but for all, but when I was a part of coalitions and currently a part of coalitions that are fighting for childcare, single payer, minimum wage, mental health justice, environmental sustainability, food access, educational resources, immigration reform, and refugee rights and accompaniment programs that were even members of the Refund Oakland coalition, I had no idea that we were in reality actually fighting for denuclearization of the entire planet. Once I started joining peace caucuses with Wellstone and kind of expanding this notion of anti-war and anti-nuclear weaponry, I discovered, oh my gosh, all the issues that we're faced with on the local level truly are coming from the funding of an arms race, a global arms race. And what this has done in detriment to not just our country, but to many countries, right? As we remove ourselves from the WHO, as we remove ourselves from many different organizations that the world has depended on our services and various other nations and developed nation services for, which includes childcare, healthcare, you know, anti-poverty. It includes everything that we are suffering under. And I want to also touch a little bit about the fact that this is all a part of the institutionalized slavery that we have literally been encountering for 400 plus years. This is, I think we need to really understand that this is all a part of that system and what it means to, you know, have a system that continuously supports the suppression, the oppression, the slavery, the wage slavery, in order to continue to fight for basically a war economy and a nuclearized economy. And so I think that, you know, when we talk about all of these things, it's important to highlight that, take that into consideration. And that's kind of the perspective where I'm coming from, is I'm coming from, well, where can we look for more funds? How can we encourage our local, our state, our national government to open up their eyes to the fact that this really is a global issue that us as community members have been basically, you know, mobilizing for a very long time. And, and so currently we know that the HEROES Act in the federal government and the Child Care is Essential Act would be two specific asks that the petitions that we are working with educational advocates on currently to be able to fund supplemental income for childcare and supplemental income for parents that are about to do homeschooling again for the second time under COVID. And these, you know, the reason why it's so crucial to be looking towards a demand, not just the demands list, as Nell has pointed out, right? It's really crucial. And thank you so much also, Nell, for, you know, announcing the Poor People's Campaign demands list. I think at this point, every single organization needs to have a demands list. Every single organization needs to also be fighting for policies at the federal level that are going to be funneling monies into the state, as the state of California and many states across this country are going through major deficits. When it comes to the environment, this is going to be really key. Another member, I believe in the previous group, was discussing about holding organizations and holding people accountable for meeting the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, you know, requirements. This is going to be really crucial because this is going to be another avenue, right, that families and that coalition members can actually be reaching out to seek more funding in terms of regaining the monies that we lost during this deficit, while you have 1% making $22.65 trillion during COVID. And the rest of us are like, well, we're losing our homes. We have no childcare. We, you know, have seen an increase of violence in our communities that is really destructive and really devastating. And by the way, it's more costly on all of us, including billionaires, right, who are literally about to have to pay back in taxes and possibly even in lawsuits. And then when looking at OPD and other agencies, not just OPD, but other agencies and law enforcement and other agencies that were used as tools by billionaires, by the government, in order to keep their wealth intact. They are about to begin to start seeing a responsibility shift where the responsibility is no longer going to be on the people who cannot afford these increased taxes anymore. It's not going to be on the people who, you know, have been literally working as wage slaves for the rest of our lives. You know, it's literally going to be shifted onto the agencies that have the money. And let's also remind ourselves when we talk about defunding the police, especially in our local community, and when we talk about defunding the OPD, what we're really, really asking for is for the money that was laundered, because that's what it was. It was money laundering. And so we are asking for the money that was laundered to be returned back to the community where it actually was to belong to in the first place, right? And we remember what that first budget looked like under this current administration in Oakland. We remember watching preschool completely written out of the budget, while an entire new department of the FBI was then written in. An entire new expanded resources for the OPD was also written into the first budget. It took the former vice mayor, who unfortunately resigned, it took her to write preschool. Along with our childcare agencies, including Parent Voices Oakland and all of these coalitions of educational advocates, to come together and literally write preschool into the budget. So, you know, we've been fighting for the funding from the start, even before, I think James had mentioned for 5 years with the Anti-Police Terror Project. I mean, this is real, right? Why is it taking more than 5 years, more than 10 years for coalition members and for people and organizers to literally be fighting for, you know, the resources that we need as everyday people, residents, parents, community members, and not only that, really high taxpayers. I mean, we pay more than 30%, more than 40% of all of our paychecks towards the taxes, while we have had millionaires, billionaires paying absolutely nothing. We've watched our schools close. I mean, an insane amount of schools close down because of the privatization and the fact that they are charging higher property taxes on the flatlands than they are charging in the hills. This has forced many childcare facilities and many schools to shut down. And we know that this is going to continue to persist unless if we come together on demands lists, literally, start to literally say, these are our demands lists and these are the policies, even if we have to write the policies, which actually we're even beginning to do, is when we heard from the federal government and federal you know, executives from their departments, their respective departments, flat out tell us on national television, you know, we're not the ones with the answers. You are going to be the ones that are going to have to do it all. It's up to the local to do it. This is really alarming, because you're telling me as a single mom that, you know, as broke as I am, it's my responsibility to look into the U.S. Department of Education budget, you know, to work with Christina, who is a mother of 4 children living in the flatlands in deep East Oakland, to literally look into the U.S. Department of Education budget and actually work this out for you, not making a dime, not making a penny on it, while they sit back and collect taxpayer dollar salaries. This is really alarming. And I think we as a community have to wake up and have to continue waking up. And I think everybody on here is definitely awake and awoken to the fact that we have to start writing our own laws, our own policies, our own measures that we want to see rolled out for our families in the community. And I know Christina had mentioned $2.5 million. We really need to start looking into really what the total is actually going to be when we not only hold OPD accountable for the monies that were laundered, because that's what it was. And if you think about it, a lawsuit against money laundering is actually way more than $2.5 million. You know, it's probably 100 million in a lawsuit itself for money laundering. But basically, you know, we would have to look into not only the monies that we would get from the OPD, we need to look in the monies that we are going to get from the state, that we are going to get from the federal government, and most of all, from the encouragement of the federal government and of the state governments to start taxing the billionaires that have privatized and reaped benefit off of the lives, including especially those whose lives were actually lost due to privatization, whether it be indigenous lives, whether it be the Black lives that were lost, whether it be the Asian lives and all other races, right, that pretty much were cleansed in certain populations and in certain areas. We're really dealing with this global issue that we need to recognize that that is what we're faced with on a local level. I don't want to take up too much time, but I wanted to just send that message that we are ready and willing to support 100% any demands list and any need for writing of local policies and state policies. Let's begin to write them together and actually start to get them passed, because we heard it from the horse's mouth. It's up to us. It's not even up to them anymore. They completely have just abandoned it all and left us to deal with it on our own. And that being said, I think that's pretty much that. I would love to hear any questions, any comments. I would love to open it up just for a dialogue, discussion. And I need to put the petitions.
I'm on mute. It's good. Yeah, if you have a link to the petition, please drop it in the chat. We've got about 15 more minutes, folks, and I do want to open this back up and also turn this into, if I can, a whiteboard session. If there's any ideas or potential collaborations that you think that any of these groups, or as from a strategic standpoint, we should be looking at, dialogues we should be happening, should seek to pursue or to encourage, I'd like us to, you know, drop those in the chat. I was going to see if we could whiteboard it up as well and make it collaborative if folks are good with that. But I didn't see any hands up in terms of questions, but if you want to, please unmute yourself, ask questions and or share into what Nelsie has said. We've got about 12 minutes before we go back to the main plenary. I'm going to ask Josh to share the links back in the chat, so that once we do end, you'll be able to, or just the main link, if you don't mind there, Josh, back into the chat, folks, so that once we do in this session, you'll click that link and we'll all return back to the main plenary session. But from what Nelsie said, any questions there? Anyone want to weigh in or add to what Nelsie's said there? Don't everybody rush at once.
I do see a lot of really great comments. Thank you. Thank you for the support.
Good. And so I wanted to say, James, Nelsie, Nell, definitely, I see you here, and Christina, from what you've heard from one another and for what yet lies ahead in this exploration of reassessing our city's priorities as funding does follow, budgets do follow the values and priorities of our communities. As we reassess that, as it pertains specifically to police departments, the 50% is a great baseline in terms of a point of a discussion. But for the work that we're doing and looking at that, what challenges do you see that either you specifically are wrestling with or that lie ahead that we need to be considering here?
That's a great question, Amos. I'll take it unless anyone else has a burning desire to. I think one of the things, one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is that all of a sudden the world decided to pay attention to the Defund OPD movement, or in defund in general. And so now they're like, okay, let's invest in the replacements. Let's invest in all of these systems. And a lot of the systems that we're talking about that we need to develop to replace law enforcement have been, you know, systemically underinvested in and discouraged for decades and decades, if not generations. And so the way we as communities keep ourselves safe, the way communities of undocumented folks keep themselves safe, the way communities of Black folks who refuse to call the police when mental health crises keep themselves safe, those have not been invested in and systematized. What has been systematized is law enforcement. And so right now in this era of defund OPD, invest in community, I want to make, my hope is that we'll invest in the experimentation of what it means to scale up these systems that we use to keep ourselves safe. Like what is, you know, when Christina talks about having safety teams come into schools to serve students, that's not a one-size-fits-all model, right? It depends what your school is, what the cultural realities are. Like if there are special learners, like there's so many calculations that need to come into play. And I just don't want us to rush into systematizing models without establishing best practices. And so that challenge is around, hello, Audrey. Hello, sweetie.
Hi, Audrey.
Hi, Audrey. Audrey makes it into every Zoom call, no matter what I do. That it doesn't only apply to education or mental health, it also applies to interpersonal violence and in every area where we're really talking about defunding, when we're talking about investing in community. And so I want to encourage people to invest in systems like what Christina is talking about and what people are talking about across the country. Let's give folks a chance to show us what their systems can do before we rush into, you know, do what the state always does, which is co-opt our models and water them down and implement them en masse to the point that they're meaningless.
Yeah, I saw you light up there. Anything? Or Christina, unmute yourself, please. And
Yes.
if anybody else wants to just chime in, unmute yourself. It's an open discussion.
Yeah, so for me, you know, for activists, you know, to make it in the election process, you know, activists, we have spent most of our time in the trenches working with the community and trying to heal our community, right? And trying to desperately fundraise money, you know, so that we can heal our community. Then when these activists decide, like, I want to run for office, you know, our connections are not there with all the political movement, right? Even though we're the ones that have been working, you know, to and to help heal our community. And, you know, I'm running a grassroots movement, you know, no charter, no privatized money, no charter money. And I know that the greatest obstacle that I'm going to be facing towards implementing what I want to implement is that I'm going to be fighting, you know, with candidates that are going to be heavily funded, you know, by these same individuals that I'm fighting in my community. So, so that's, for me, that's the challenge, you know. So how can we begin to change our electoral system, so, you know, so that we can be able to have a more just election, you know, where it's not, you know, where one candidate doesn't get all this privatization money, and that's okay. That's legal, that's lawful, instead of, you know, just getting the collective, you know, vote of the people. So yeah, that's the challenge. And but why do any type of government benefit from having activists? I'm gonna tell you why. Like I was saying before, you know, we work collectively in a circle, all activists, right? And in that center is the intersectionality, where we all come together and we realize that, yeah, I might be working in the anti-rape movement, but my anti-rape survivor, my survivor of sexual assault, you know, is unsheltered. Is LGBTQ, is immigrant. So we all come and share our stories of woe and try to help our community together. The most important thing is that nobody needs to tell us or try to convince us or try to hold a protest sign off our office, because we already know what we're going through, right? Because we're in the trenches. So we knew that there was police brutality before the nation got a wake-up call after George Floyd. We knew that there was an epidemic of sexual assault against women before the Me Too movement and the nation woken up to it. And we know that there was a you know, housing crisis, you know, before our politicians decided now to pass, you know, current laws and to deal with the unsheltered. And the saddest thing that happens is that most of these communities who have been working for years, when the money is finally available, it becomes political. So not many of us are getting those funds to continue our work, because it becomes like who that individual knows in politics, who has supported their campaign, and those are the individuals that get the money. So, I mean, the challenge for anyone who's trying to make change at a political level, who comes from a background of and a backbone of political activists, is really that it becomes an unfair system for us, and because of all the privatized money and just, you know, the political culture.
So what I would add to what's already been said is that we are, you know, in this moment when there's a groundswell of support for defund. But take the example of here in Oakland, even though thousands of people commented to the city council, they still only managed to reduce the police budget by a fraction of what was called for. And so there's a disconnect between the people's voice and the politicians' actions. And so we have to put those people who are in public and elected positions not representing the public on the unemployment line. We wish that them well, you know, we're not trying to dog them out, but we just wish that they were unemployed instead of in positions of power. And so, you know, it's a lot. There were millions of people who didn't vote in 2016. And Donald Trump did not win the election. He stole the election. He lost the election by millions of votes. But because we didn't account for the cheat factor, we have a monster in the White House. So, you know, we're really, like I said, we're nonpartisan, but we're very political. And so we really are encouraging people to vote, basically, and to let their voices be heard in that particular way. You know, we know that voting is only one aspect of how you have to raise your voice. Those votes would not count if there were not people in the streets. And so I'm grateful for every person who has taken the risk, especially in the time of COVID, to be in a crowd of people to let their voices be heard. And so I want to shout out Portland, because they right now are the front lines of the fascist backlash of Donald Trump and his troopers who are going to try to put down any refusal to accept his leadership, such as it is, and now and into the future. And so I want to encourage people, because voter suppression is a real thing. And if our votes didn't matter, then they wouldn't be so dedicated to gerrymandering and scrubbing people from the voting rolls and discouraging people from voting in every possible way that they can. So, I just want to raise that as, something that's important for people to do, is to vote. And then we still have to be in the streets to hold people who are elected accountable.
No, that quickly goes into my question. And thank you all to the panelists who've spoken and for all the work that you've done. Just quickly, really quick, about the accountability of all elected officials. There's a good argument to say that Joe Biden would be pretty equally as bad as Donald Trump. What are some efforts, not only locally, but on a national level, that the defund movement would want to hold Joe Biden accountable for, and is looking for in terms of his guarantee of being the nomination for the Democratic Party and trying to secure that nomination and victory?
Is that for anyone? Oh, go ahead, James.
Yeah, for sure. Two things.
And
One,
quickly here, we only have 2 minutes here.
Okay, real quick, I would push back firmly against Joe Biden being as bad as Donald Trump. I think that we are sophisticated enough to parse how problematic both of them are and how they're problematic. We all know and criticized Obama for under his tenure, the mass deportations, the police violence, and all of the other issues that he brought before us. But at the same time, I don't want us to blur the lines between presidents like Trump, who are fascist, and presidents like Biden and Obama, who are neoliberal, because their agendas are very different in how they attempt to influence the people. And again, just like Obama with Biden, we're going to do what we've always been doing, which is like what Christina said and what Nelsie said and what Nell said. We organize no matter who the president is. We organize no matter who's in power at the national level, because we're always fighting for rights that we've been denied our entire time here in this nation.
Good. I want to thank everyone for your time. Christina Molina, thank you. Nelsie Batista, Nell Myhan, James Birch, for your words, your work, and for contributing to this very important conversation. I do want all four of you, if you haven't exchanged information, please find each other in the chat, or I'll connect you thereafter. If any of you participants would like to also continue the conversation, please join us in the main session. The link's provided for you in the chat. If you do have any other further questions, please email us at the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force through our website at CEMTF.org. We'll repeat that in the next session coming up. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I'll see you in the main room shortly. Thank you.